Hello, everyone, and welcome to Students at First online services. I'm Trevor Backhoffner. I'm the Students and Families Pastor here at First Christian Church, and we have been talking the last several weeks about the big picture, specifically in the life of Joseph, who we read about in the Old Testament book of Genesis. It's the first one in your Bible. A lot of unbelievable things happened in the life of Joseph, and we've seen all through what he's experienced that God was with him and working towards good, even when Joseph couldn't see it. But here's the beginning question for you this week. Have you ever tried to get payback? I think this is a fairly obvious question for most of us. All of us have wanted payback in our lives, and for many of us as well, we've taken the opportunity to get back at people who have wronged us. And a story I think shows just how much that quest for payback and revenge consumes us is the movie The Revenant. If you haven't seen it, number one, spoiler alert as always. Number two, go see it. It's really incredible. It's the one movie that Leonardo DiCaprio actually got an Oscar for. But it's this guy who gets mauled by a bear and is left for dead. His best friend, or at least the person he thought was his best friend, kills his son and then just leaves him. So he has to crawl, walk, just pull himself across this cold, wintry wilderness to heal himself and find the man who has ruined his life. He's consumed with revenge from this point on in the story. And while this is a drastic picture of what payback and revenge can look like, we can all identify with the story. All of us have had someone do something to us or say something to us or treat us in a way that makes us want only one thing: payback. And we have that power, and we have a few ways that we can choose to wield it. We can obviously go public with it and do something very direct and open to the person that has wronged us. We can be passive about it, where we decide to be less obvious, a little more subtle, or we can just keep it all in our head and think about it a lot. And the fact of the matter is, payback feels fair, but it's not good for us. It's not the best thing for us as followers of Jesus. And in Genesis chapter 45, we see how Joseph was put in charge of the food distribution over Egypt. Where we saw him last week is he interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh, kind of predicted that this famine was going to happen. So Pharaoh made him the number 2 guy in all of Egypt. The only one who was more important was the Pharaoh. So he's over the food distribution, and who comes calling? All of his brothers. They were in a place that didn't anticipate the famine, and they were starving. And one thing to keep in mind here is that they still believe Joseph's dead. They haven't seen him since he was a teenager, so they don't recognize Joseph when they encounter him in our reading here. And when he reveals his identity to them, they are stunned. Let's read the text here. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 45, verses 1 through 5, and also in verses 10 and 11. Slides will be on the screen. Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, "Out, all of you." So he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. Then he broke down and wept. He wept so loudly the Egyptians could hear him, and word of it quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace. "I am Joseph," he said to his brothers. "Is my father still alive?" But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. "Please come closer," he said to them. So they came closer, and he said again, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. You can live in the region of Goshen, where you can be near me with all your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and everything you own. I will take care of you there, for there are still 5 years of famine ahead of us. Otherwise you, your household, and all your animals will starve." So we see here that his emotions from seeing his brothers again is very overwhelming for him. He yells at everyone to leave so he can just be alone there with his brothers, and he cries so hard and so loud that the Egyptians could hear him all the way in the palace of Pharaoh. While they were close in proximity, still kind of a big deal. Then Joseph reveals his true identity to them, asks again whether or not his dad is alive, and the brothers have no idea what to think or feel or anything. They just sit there. He allows them closer. He explains that all has been forgiven. He speaks of his being sold into slavery, not to make them feel bad, but just to confirm who he actually is. And in this, we can see that he had every right to treat them with contempt. Enact his revenge and pay them back 100-fold for everything that they did to him. But he has this almost supernatural grace about him that he couldn't have had without a deep connection to God. And instead of choosing the obvious thing, which was payback and revenge, he chose peace and forgiveness. And just like Joseph, when we can't see the bigger picture, we can also choose to forgive. He didn't know for sure that his brothers had changed their minds, changed their ways. He had a hunch, of course, after listening to the speech of his brothers prior to our text here, but he couldn't know 100%. For us, that might be the case too, where we might not have all the details, but we should still choose to forgive the ones who have wronged us. As followers of Jesus, we can be that bridge to connect them to God instead of destroying the relationship and burning a bridge. So moving forward from this and taking a page from Joseph's book, we can begin to choose forgiveness in a few ways. Number one, start small. Practice extending grace and forgiveness and peace to others in smaller ways so that it will be easier to do it when bigger things come along. Secondly, forgive first. We don't have to wait around for the other person to apologize or ask forgiveness. We can make the first move and forgive those who have wronged us so that we can move on in a healthy way. So start small, forgive first, and lastly, pursue forgiveness. We can't control others, but we can control how we treat them and how we respond to them. Choosing forgiveness instead of payback, just like Joseph did. Through all of the crazy experiences that Joseph went through in his life, he couldn't see the bigger picture, but all along the way, he trusted God, and eventually, everything was made right. And the same can be true in our lives. So as we close out our conversation today about forgiveness, think about this. What's the hardest thing about choosing forgiveness?